Welcome to another deep dive, and this time we're going to explore haunted houses.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, we're looking at this video from YouTube called Five Haunted Houses and Their Creepy Background Stories,
Okay.
and it's from the channel Mr. Nightmare, and it's basically a collection of stories about houses all across the U.S. that are supposed to be haunted.
hmm
So today we're gonna kind of go beyond just the spooky stories themselves and like look at what makes a place truly haunted. You know?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, and I think these types of stories really get it. Like, they blend history and tragedy and the unexplained, and really tap into like kind of primal fears,
Yeah, exactly.
kind of fascinations.
Yeah, and so our first stop takes us to Massachusetts,
Okay.
to a place called the Dudley House.
Right.
And it's not even just the stories themselves that are creepy, it's also like the setting of this place.
Okay.
So this house was built on what was once Mohawk Indian tribal ground, and it's surrounded by this place called the Dark Entry Forest.
Oh wow, just the name Dark Entry
Yeah.
sounds creepy.
I know, right?
And the forest itself almost has like as chilling of a history as the house. There are
Yeah.
all these stories about people just vanishing, within its shadowy depths.
Oh, wow.
It just adds this whole other like layer of folklore to this location.
Yeah.
The house itself has a reputation for all these strange occurrences. People report hearing screams,
Mm-hmm.
they feel like unseen forces, or even see mysterious orbs.
Orbs. What are those, like ghostly dust bunnies or something?
Yeah, those like spherical lights that people sometimes capture in photographs.
Yeah.
Some people think that they represent like spiritual energy,
Interesting.
but that's not all.
Okay, there's more.
Yeah, this place is supposed to be super haunted.
Like what else? What else happens there?
Well, there's these more modern accounts of people hearing like banging from inside this house.
From inside.
Yeah, but it's all boarded up.
So nobody can get in.
Yeah, and nobody can see who or what is making these sounds.
Oh, that's freak.
And to make things even more mysterious, the Dudley House is now owned by this group called the Dark Entry Forest Association,
Okay.
and it's heavily patrolled.
Really? So like, are they trying to keep something in or keep people out?
Yeah, who knows, right? Could be both.
Yeah, I guess so.
No.
All right. Well, let's move from colonial New England to the glitz and glamour of 1930s Hollywood.
Ooh.
All right. With our next stop, we're going to the Harlow House in California.
Okay.
And this house has a very strong connection to tragedy.
Oh no.
Yeah. So back in the 1930s, this producer named Paul Byrne was found dead there under very mysterious circumstances, just like 2 months after marrying this actress, Jean Harlow.
Wow.
Yeah. And officially they ruled as suicide, but there's all these rumors of foul play and like studio cover-ups and stuff like that.
Also like a classic Hollywood scandal.
Right, exactly. It's full of secrets and whispers.
Oh yeah.
But the story doesn't end there, right? I think someone else famous lived there too.
You're right. Years later, the house was occupied by actress Sharon Tate,
Oh.
who also tragically died at the hands of the Manson family.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
But before she died, she claimed to have actually seen Brian's ghost on the property.
So there's two really high-profile, tragic deaths connected to this one place.
It's quite a lot of tragedy for one house.
Right.
Makes you wonder, like, could this location somehow attract darkness, or are these stories, just fueling our imaginations and making us more likely to perceive paranormal things?
What do you think? I mean, it just seems like a lot,
I mean, it's possible that, like, the weight of these events has left, like, an emotional imprint on the house.
Yeah.
But it's also worth considering, how our knowledge of these tragedies might influence, like, what we perceive,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay, so for our next stop, we're trading Hollywood glamour for something a little more unsettling, I guess.
Okay.
The Connecticut Funeral Home.
Okay.
Again, a funeral home is already kind of creepy.
It is, just by its nature.
Right, but this one has a particularly disturbing story.
Okay, what happened?
So this place was built in 1916, and it was used as a funeral home for decades before being purchased by a family in 1986.
Okay.
And imagine their surprise when they moved in and found coffin handles and a blood drainage pit
Oh my God.
in their new home.
Yeah, I would not be happy about that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would. But hold on, it gets worse.
Right.
This family, they started experiencing some really creepy things in this house.
Like what?
So at first it was just doors and windows opening and closing on their own,
Okay.
which is kind of typical poltergeist activity.
Yeah.
But then things escalated, like screams and cries coming from the closets.
Oh no.
Yeah, really scary stuff.
Oh wow.
But probably the most disturbing thing about this story is what happened to the family's oldest son.
What happened?
So he was undergoing radiation treatment at the time.
So already in a vulnerable state.
Right, exactly. And he became like really withdrawn, angry. He started writing poetry with these necrophilic themes.
Oh, wow.
And he actually ended up attacking his cousin.
Oh, no, that's awful.
Yeah, so it really makes you wonder, was this like paranormal activity preying on this vulnerable person?
Right.
Or was it just his mental health declining?
That is really unsettling.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Tough question.
All right, so maybe we should move on to something a bit lighter.
Okay.
Just kidding. Our next stop is the Summerwind House in Wisconsin.
Summerwind House, okay.
Yeah, so this was built in 1916, and it was like a peaceful summer retreat for this wealthy family.
Okay.
And as with most of the houses on our list today, it wasn't long before people started talking about strange things happening there.
Of course.
Yeah. So one of the stories goes that the original owner, a guy named Robert Lamont, heard rattling in his basement door one night.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and he thought it was an intruder, so he fired his pistol through the door.
Oh, my gosh.
I know, right? But when he went down there to check, there was no intruder?
So he shot at a ghost.
Maybe. Yeah, that's what some people think. But things got even worse when a new family moved in the 1970s, the Henshaw family.
What happened to them?
Well, they only lasted about 6 months in the house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but they reported all kinds of crazy paranormal activity.
Like what?
Well, they said they saw vague shapes and shadows, they heard mumbled voices, and they even saw a ghostly woman floating by the French doors.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, and doors and windows would just like open and close on their own.
Wow.
It got so bad that the father, Arnold Henshaw, actually nailed one of the windows shut.
Wow. They must have been terrified.
Yeah, so do you think there was some kind of malicious entity in that house, that was becoming more aggressive over time?
It's possible. Or maybe it was the family's own fear that was amplifying things,
Yeah, that makes sense.
like drafts or settling noises. Maybe they were interpreting them as something more sinister.
Yeah, I could see that happening.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready for our final stop, and this one might be the most infamous of them all.
Okay, hit me with it.
The Villisca Axe Murder House in Iowa.
Ooh, just the name sends chills down my spine.
I know, right?
What happened there?
So this house is totally isolated, like boarded up with a sign warning visitors about its history.
Wow.
And for good reason. So back in 1912, this entire family, the Moores, along with 2 of their guests, they were all murdered in their sleep with an axe.
Oh my God.
And to this day, the case remains unsolved.
So it's a cold case.
Yeah, adding even more mystery to this whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so people believe that the energy of that night is somehow imprinted on the house.
That makes sense, given what happened there.
Yeah, and it's become like a popular spot for paranormal investigators and ghost tours, and people who go there often claim to experience all kinds of strange stuff.
Really? Like what?
They say they hear children's voices, or they see objects moving on their own, or they just feel this sense of dread.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's pretty creepy.
So, I mean, is it really the spirits of the victims that are causing these things?
Right.
Or is it just the psychological impact of knowing what happened there?
That's the million-dollar question.
I know, right?
Well, I think these 5 stories, with all their history and tragedy and mystery, they raise a lot of questions about, the nature of hauntings.
Yeah.
It's clear that these houses have all experienced, a lot of darkness. But is it really the presence of spirits that makes them haunted?
Or something else.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Well, we've just scratched the surface here.
I have.
And when we come back, we'll take a deeper dive into the common threads that run through these haunted house tales and explore why we as humans are so drawn to the macabre.
Sounds good.
I'm in.
Stay with us.
Welcome back. So we've just taken like a virtual tour of 5 allegedly haunted houses.
Yeah, it's a lot of creepy.
Each with its own unique brand of creepy. But now let's step back for a second and think about what these stories tell us about like why we're so fascinated by ghosts and hauntings and all that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I'm noticing is that there's a lot of tragedy connected to these hauntings. Like almost every house we talked about had a history of like untimely deaths or violence or just suffering in general.
Yeah.
It's almost like these places absorb that negative energy and they hold on to it like echoes of the past,
Yeah, that's a common thread in a lot of haunted house tales. I mean, take the Harlow house, for instance.
Okay.
With Paul Byrne and Jean Harlow, and then years later, Sharon Tate. It makes you wonder, does the energy of these events linger somehow?
Yeah.
And maybe even attract or fuel more paranormal activity?
I think so, but I'm also wondering if maybe knowing about these tragedies beforehand makes us more likely to interpret like ambiguous events as being paranormal.
That's a good point.
Like, let's say that house had been a bakery for the past 50 years.
Right.
Would people still be reporting shadowy figures and stuff?
It's hard to say. I mean, our expectations and what we believe definitely shapes how we perceive things.
Right.
But it's also possible, that these locations hold on to some form of energy from the past.
Yeah.
Like an imprint that some people are just more sensitive to.
So it's not just about whether ghosts exist. It's also about, like, how our own minds interpret the world around us. Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes it so intriguing.
Exactly. And, speaking of mystery, it's interesting how many of these stories involve unsolved crimes, like the Villisca Axe murder house.
Yeah, that one's over 100 years old, and we still have no idea who did it.
Right. And it just makes you wonder, is it the spirits of the victims that are, like, seeking justice, or are we just projecting our own need for closure onto these unsolved mysteries?
It's really hard to say.
Yeah, it's tough.
I think it speaks to our desire for answers.
Yeah.
When we can't find, like, a logical explanation, we tend to fill in the blanks with something.
Right, and sometimes that something is supernatural.
Exactly.
And I guess we just can't resist a good ghost story.
Especially when it's based on real events.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got tragedy, mystery, our own perceptions, but I think there's another important element here.
What's that?
Storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
These haunted house tales aren't just about the events themselves, they're about how we make sense of those events.
Right.
Through stories.
You're absolutely right. Storytelling is, like, fundamental to the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
We use stories to understand the world, to connect with each other.
To make sense of things.
Yeah, and ghost stories in particular, they allow us to explore those boundaries between what we know and what we don't know.
Right, and to kind of confront our fears, but in a safe way.
Exactly. It's like a thought experiment.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Dudley house and how the stories of people disappearing in the dark entry forest are almost like part of the house's haunting itself.
Right.
It's like the house and the forest are feeding off each other's creepiness through the stories that people tell.
Yeah, that's a great example of how folklore and storytelling can become intertwined with a location's history and reputation.
Right, and those stories then influence how we perceive those places.
Absolutely.
It's like a feedback loop.
Uh-huh. The stories create fear, the fear fuels more stories, and so on.
Right, and within that loop, we find a reflection of ourselves, our fears, our desires.
Yeah, I mean, ghost stories allow us to kind of explore themes of mortality loss, the presence of those who have passed on.
Right, and they force us to confront some uncomfortable truths about, existence and stuff.
Yeah, it's not all just fun and games, right?
No, it's deep.
There's some serious existential stuff wrapped up in these tales.
Yeah, we're talking about our fear of death and what might be beyond.
Yeah, exactly. They offer a way for us to grapple with those big questions in a symbolic way.
Right, and they remind us that life is precious and that we don't know everything.
There are still mysteries out there
Right.
that we may never fully understand.
Okay, so we've got tragedy, mystery, the power of perception, and how good these stories are at grabbing our attention.
Yeah, it's a pretty potent combination.
But there's still one big question that we haven't fully addressed.
What's that?
Why are we so drawn to these stories in the first place?
Yeah, that is the question that keeps us coming back for more.
Why do we seek out these creepy stories, these haunted locations, even though they often scare us? I mean, is it just for the thrill?
I don't think so. I
Yeah.
think it goes deeper than that.
Yeah.
I think it's about our desire to understand the world,
Mm-hmm.
even the parts that don't make sense.
Right, like the things that we can't explain with logic.
Exactly. We're fascinated by the possibility that there might be more to life than what we can see and touch.
So it's not just about being scared, it's about a genuine curiosity about the unknown.
Yeah, like a desire to push the boundaries of our understanding.
And I think there's also an element of wonder mixed in with that fear.
Definitely.
Like these stories remind us that the world is still full of mysteries, things we can't explain or control.
And sometimes that can be both terrifying and exhilarating.
It's like we're drawn to the edge of a cliff,
Hmm.
wanting to peek over, but also afraid of what we might see.
And that feeling, that mix of awe and unease, is part of what makes these stories so compelling.
Yeah, I agree. So we're not just passive consumers of these stories.
Yep.
We're actively engaging with
We're
them.
grappling with big questions about life and death
Mhm.
and what it all means.
Exactly, and I think that's something important to remember as we move into the final part of our deep dive.
Yeah,
These stories are more than just spooky entertainment.
they are.
They're a reflection of our deepest fears and desires.
Our fascination with the unknown.
Our search for meaning in a world that can sometimes feel wondrous and terrifying at the same time.
I like that.
So it's not just about ghosts.
It's about us.
And on that note, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
But when we come back, we'll explore one final thought-provoking question that might just change your whole perspective on haunted houses.
Ooh, I like it.
Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into haunted houses.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have from like creepy backstories to the psychology of believing in ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
But before we go, I think you had one more thought-provoking question for our listeners.
I do.
Something to really get them thinking about haunted houses in a new way.
Okay, so what if instead of asking, are these places haunted by spirits, we ask what they might be haunted by?
Okay. I'm intrigued. You're going to have to elaborate on that.
What if these locations are haunted not by ghosts, but by like the weight of history,
Okay.
the echoes of emotions, the stories we tell ourselves about them?
Mm-hmm.
What if those chills we feel aren't coming from like a supernatural entity,
All right.
but from the power of collective memory,
Okay.
of human experiences so intense that they leave a mark on a place?
So instead of focusing on like, do ghosts exist or not, we're
Right.
shifting our attention to what else could create these feelings of unease or these strange occurrences.
Yeah.
It's these stories that just keep getting passed down.
Are we sensing like the energy of past events,
Mm-hmm.
the emotions left behind by people who came before us?
Interesting.
Or are we just projecting our own fears onto these places
Yeah.
and kind of like shaping them into haunted spaces through our imagination?
I mean, think about the Dudley House and the Dark Entry Forest.
Exactly.
All those stories about people disappearing, going mad, seeing strange things.
Right? It's like the history of that place is just as creepy as any ghost.
Right, and maybe that unsettling feeling is what we're really responding to.
Yeah.
Not a ghost, but like the weight of all that history, all those stories.
All those unanswered questions.
So haunted houses are haunted by history and emotions and stories.
Maybe
Not ghosts.
it's a question worth considering.
It is. It really is.
It challenges us to think beyond simple explanations
Yeah.
and to consider like the connection between human experience and perception and place.
Well, we started this deep dive asking what makes a house truly haunted.
Right.
And I think we've arrived at a much more complicated answer than we expected.
We have a haunted house might not be about ghosts, but about the presence of the past, the echoes of emotions, the stories we tell.
It's a good reminder that what's real and what's imagined isn't always so clear,
Right.
and that we play a big role in shaping our own experiences.
Especially when it comes to things we can't explain.
Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation.
It has.
And I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
I hope so.
So until next time, stay curious,